You weren't imagining it. That pause in their voice, that sudden shift in energy when you walked into the room, that feeling that something was off even though nothing obvious was said. You were right, and that's exactly why you need to be careful now. Because when a chosen one becomes certain, truly certain about someone's intention, the danger doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from confirmation, you see. Most people don't get into trouble for being wrong. They get into trouble for being right too early. And you've crossed that line. There is someone in your orbit who has been watching you quietly, studying how you move, tracking how you respond, measuring how much you see, not because they admire you, but because you disrupt something they rely on. At first, they underestimated you. They thought your kindness meant blindness. They assumed your calm meant ignorance. They mistook your silence for uncertainty. That was their first mistake. Because chosen ones don't observe loudly, they register. And the moment you internally clocked what this person was really doing without reacting, without exposing them, without changing your tone, the power dynamic shifted. That's when it became dangerous. Not because you attacked them, but because you didn't. People with hidden intentions rely on two outcomes: confrontation or submission. They are prepared for accusation. They are prepared for fear. They are prepared for emotional reactions they can twist, deny, or weaponize. What they are not prepared for is clarity without reaction. And that's what you gave them. You didn't call them out. You didn't question them. You didn't pull away. Dramatically, you simply saw them. And that kind of sight is unsettling. Because once a chosen one sees through someone, the illusion collapses internally even if it remains intact externally. And the person senses it instinctively before logic catches up. That's why their behavior changed. Suddenly, they're more curious about your life. Suddenly, they're testing boundaries casually. Suddenly, they're trying to extract information through indirect questions. Not to connect, to calculate. This person is trying something, but not what you think. They're not trying to hurt you openly. They're not trying to confront you directly. They're trying to reposition themselves before you fully disengage. Because once you detach internally, access is lost. And access is what they need. Here's what you must understand. Some people don't want to destroy youth. They want to use your clarity while staying hidden. They want proximity to your discernment without being exposed by it. That's why they mirror you subtly. That's why they agree with you more than before. That's why they suddenly validate things they once dismissed. It's not growth, it's adaptation, and adaptation without integrity is manipulation. This is where chosen ones often make a critical error. They think, now that I see them, I should confront them. Or worse, now that I see them, I should save them. No, your clarity is not an invitation, it's a boundary, and boundaries don't need explanations. The reason this situation escalated internally is because you're entering a phase where your discernment is sharper than ever, but your visibility is also increasing. People can sense when someone has clarity, even if they don't understand it. And that attracts two types of individuals: those who want guidance and those who want leverage. This one wants leverage, not over your body, not over your resources, but over your perception. They want to see how much you know. They want to test how far they can go. They want to determine whether you fully clocked them or only partially. That's why they're inconsistent. Warm one day, distant the next. Helpful, then subtly undermining. They're probing, and probing is never harmless. But here's the advantage. You have on, this is critical. You are already ahead, because the moment you felt it, Instead of doubting it, the power shifted to you. Chosen ones don't need evidence to be accurate. They need confirmation to trust themselves. And you've already crossed that threshold. That's why you feel the urge to pull back quietly, why your energy tightens around them, why you're less inclined to share details. That's not fear. That's wisdom activating. Be careful not to second guess it, because the only window they have left is confusion. If they can make you doubt your perception, they regain access. If they can make you over-explain, they regain control. If they can provoke an emotional reaction, they can flip the narrative. That's why restraint matters now. You don't need to expose them. You don't need to warn others. You don't need to win. You need to withdraw internally while remaining externally neutral. This is advanced discernment. Polite but distant. Calm but unavailable. Present but not open. When a chosen one does this, something interesting happens. The person reveals themselves. Without being pushed, they become impatient. They escalate subtly. They contradict themselves. Because when manipulation loses traction, it speeds up, and speed creates mistakes. Let them make them. Your role right now is not action, it's positioning. You're not paranoid. You're not overthinking. You're not being negative. You're being accurate. And accuracy without panic is what protects chosen ones from entanglement. What this person is trying to do isn't dramatic. It isn't violent. It isn't obvious. And that's why it works on most people, but not on you. Because what they're attempting is something far more subtle and far more common than people realize. They are trying to re-anchor themselves through you, not emotionally in a healthy way, not spiritually in a growth-oriented way, psychologically. You see, when someone senses that another person has clarity or inner alignment, especially someone who doesn't need external validation, it triggers something deep in those who lack it, not admiration, instability, because your presence reminds them of what they don't have. And instead of doing the difficult work of developing it themselves, some people try to borrow it. That's what this is. They're trying to stay close enough to regulate themselves through you while quietly protecting their own agenda. And that's why their behavior feels inconsistent. People who are aligned don't oscillate like that. People who are secure don't test boundaries indirectly. This person does. They are watching how you respond because your reactions help them orient themselves. Your calm grounds them. Your discernment steadies them. Your clarity gives them reference points they lack internally. But here's the problem. Borrowed clarity comes at a cost, and the cost is access. That's why they don't want you to fully disengage. But they also don't want you to close. They want to hover in that gray area where they can extract without being seen. That's what made your intuition flare. You felt the imbalance. They take more than they give. They observe more than they share. They ask questions that don't quite match the situation. Not curiosity, calibration. They're trying to figure out how aware you are, because their strategy depends on it. If you're unaware, they can continue quietly. If you're partially aware, they can adjust. If you're fully aware, they lose leverage. And leverage is everything to someone who doesn't trust themselves. This is where many chosen ones misread the situation. They assume the person is malicious. That's not always true. What's happening here is insecurity mixed with envy. And that combination doesn't need evil intent to cause harm. It just needs access. Envy doesn't always want to destroy you. Sometimes, it wants to stay near you without changing. And that's more dangerous, because it drains without attacking. This person isn't trying to take your life, your success, or your identity. They're trying to take your orientation. They want to feel less lost by staying connected to someone who isn't. But they don't want accountability. They don't want growth. They don't want truth directed at themselves. They want proximity without exposure. That's why they react subtly when you set boundaries, not anger - unease, not confrontation - withdrawal. They feel the loss immediately because their internal balance depended on you more than you realized. This is also why they may suddenly mirror you. They echo your language, adopt your viewpoints, agree with insights they once resisted. It's not coincidence. Mirroring is how insecure people hide the gap between themselves and those they envy. But mirroring collapses when the source becomes unavailable. That's why your restraint matters so much right now. You don't need to accuse them. You don't need to diagnose them. You don't need to figure them out. You already have. And once clarity is reached, the most powerful move is containment. Containment looks boring from the outside. It's not dramatic. It doesn't give closure. It doesn't satisfy curiosity, but it protects your energy completely. Containment means fewer details, shorter answers, less emotional processing in their presence. Not coldness, neutrality. Neutrality starves extraction because people who rely on others for regulation can't extract from someone who doesn't leak. And that's the key difference between awareness and overreaction. Overreaction feeds them. Silence destabilizes them. Not because you're punishing them, but because they're forced to face themselves. You may notice that as you pull back internally, they become restless. They may reach out more frequently, ask questions that feel unnecessary, bring up past conversations to reopen access, attempt emotional bonding through shared frustration. These are not random behaviors. They're attempts to re-establish the previous dynamic. Don't fall for urgency. Nothing is wrong. Nothing needs to be fixed. This phase isn't about confrontation, it's about completion. You've already learned what you needed to learn. The only thing that remains is to trust yourself enough not to re-enter a dynamic you've outgrown. And here's the part that may be uncomfortable but important. You don't owe clarity to someone who hasn't earned honesty. Access is not a right. It's a result of alignment. This doesn't make you selfish. It makes you responsible. Chosen ones often struggle here because they mistake restraint for cruelty. It's not. Restraint is wisdom applied without explanation. An explanation is only required when you've done something wrong. You haven't. You noticed something subtle. You adjusted. Accordingly, you protected your clarity. That's maturity. This person's discomfort is not your responsibility. Their growth is not your assignment. Your only task right now is to remain steady. Let them reveal themselves through impatience or adaptation. Let them feel the gap where access used to be. Don't need to watch closely. Just don't reopen the door. Because once someone tries to regulate themselves through you without consent, the dynamic can never return to neutral. And neutrality is essential for your next phase. You are entering a pivotal phase, whether you realize it or not. Everything about this person's subtle influence, every probing question, every mirrored gesture, every attempt to measure your awareness was never random. It's part of a cosmic pattern that surrounds chosen ones, a test designed not by them, but by life itself. The universe conspires this way, and yes, even Lucifer takes note. He envies this moment because it marks activation, your energy stabilizing at a level few humans ever reach. Now, you may feel tempted to act, to correct, explain, or defend, to prove that you were right all along. That is a dangerous impulse, because once you act prematurely, you give them access again. You allow their energy to merge with yours and potentially dilute your clarity. What you need to understand is that what is occurring now is a test of integration. Integration does not happen in noise or conflict. It happens in silence, in restraint, in the subtle art of being present without being provoked. Every time you resist reacting, you confirm your position as someone who cannot be manipulated externally. Every time you hold your center, you send a message the universe is already aware of. This person cannot unbalance you. That is terrifying to those who rely on others for control. They feel it instinctively. You may notice it in the way they unconsciously escalate, in the way they watch your face for micro-reactions, in the subtle tension that appears when you remain completely unflappable. This is not paranoia. It is acute perception, and you, as a chosen one, have it by design. You can feel the invisible boundaries being tested before any overt action takes place. They are trying because they know their influence is limited. That is the first sign of their failure. People who act from insecurity will always push up to the threshold they think is safe, always probing to see if they can restore access. And every time they do, you have an opportunity to observe rather than react. Every time they push, you have an opportunity to witness without attachment. Witnessing is the most powerful tool in your arsenal. It allows you to see not just their behavior, but the patterns behind it. You can recognize why they do what they do, and more importantly, what that reveals about themselves. Here's the truth. They are not targeting you because of who you are personally. They are targeting you because your energy represents alignment, stability, and authority they themselves lack. Your presence unmasks their attempts to control situations externally when internally they feel unanchored. Every attempt to manipulate you is a reflection of their own incompletion, their own insecurity, and they are desperate to find something solid outside themselves to compensate. That is why you must remain untouchable. Untouchable is not about arrogance. It's not about withdrawal for the sake of isolation. It is about preserving integrity and coherence while allowing the universe to guide the interaction toward natural resolution. You cannot force them to reveal themselves or confess their intentions. The more you attempt to manipulate the situation, the more you risk entangling yourself in a dynamic that was never yours to carry. Instead, you let their behavior play itself out. Observe how they react to your calmness. Observe how they respond to boundaries that are firm yet invisible. Observe how their energy shifts when it no longer feeds on yours. This is where mastery occurs, through perception without interference. You are not winning against them. You are simply holding your position, which is infinitely more powerful. Here's another layer to understand. The timing of this test is deliberate. This kind of situation almost always appears right before a significant personal shift, before activation of a new phase in your power, before a deeper alignment with your purpose, and before your influence expands into areas previously inaccessible. The universe orchestrates these scenarios to ensure that your energy is stabilized and uncontaminated before you step into a larger role. If you succumb to manipulation now, you risk stepping into that new phase compromised. If you remain centered, you ascend fully intact. This is why your discernment is more critical than ever. Every word you speak, every gesture you allow, Every level of emotional exposure is measured in unseen consequences. You are not just responding to a human. You are navigating a spiritual threshold. One misstep in energy, one slip into overreaction, can create a ripple that delays your full activation. That's why restraint is not passive. It is aggressive in its protection. It defends your space without needing to confront. It neutralizes influence without appearing confrontational. The stronger your ability to remain grounded while observing, the less control the other person has, and the more the universe can work in your favor. Let me clarify something essential. This is not about denial of justice or ignoring harm. It is about understanding the energetic hierarchy. You are a chosen one. Your energy cannot be weaponized by fear, insecurity, or envy. To try to correct or teach this person now is to expose yourself to unnecessary disruption. They are teaching you something through their behavior lesson in boundary enforcement, energy protection, and the silent exercise of authority. Notice how their efforts intensify when you remain calm. They may try to provoke emotional reactions, to solicit over-explanations, or to create dependency. This is because they realize their access is limited. They know your energy cannot be manipulated, and instinctively they push harder, testing every gap. This is normal. It is part of the process. It is why you must remain disciplined in both observation and disengagement. By maintaining your equilibrium, you achieve three things simultaneously. You protect your energy. You allow the universe to reveal their true intent. You confirm your alignment and readiness for the next phase. Do not be deceived by superficial friendliness, sudden interest, or temporary alignment. These are often attempts to reclaim lost leverage. Authenticity, once disrupted by awareness, cannot be faked consistently. Patterns will reveal themselves. Repetition exposes intent. And your patience is the lens through which clarity becomes undeniable at some point. This person may escalate in indirect ways, introducing small conflicts, creating confusion, or attempting subtle emotional manipulation. Recognize these as final tests, not of your power, but of your integration. Will you remain centered when provoked? Will you maintain clarity when pressure increases? Will you uphold your boundaries when instinct screams to justify or explain? Your ability to navigate these tests without reaction is proof of growth, and it marks a new threshold of activation. From this point forward, what matters most is observation, not action. Neutrality, not engagement. Preservation, not correction. When you fully embody these principles, the person's strategy will collapse on its own. Their attempts to control or influence you will fizzle, because you are no longer providing the energy they need to succeed. Their envy and subtle manipulations will have no effect, and in that vacuum, your authority and clarity will expand naturally, without effort or confrontation. And here's the ultimate takeaway for this phase. Their attempt was never about you personally. It was about the energy you carry. The clarity, alignment, and coherence that you embody naturally disrupt insecurity and envy. That is why they acted. That is why they tried. That is why you felt it before anyone else could explain it. Remain steady. Protect your energy. Observe silently. Trust your discernment. And understand that the universe has positioned this scenario deliberately. As preparation for what is next, you are more powerful than they. Realize, you are more aware than they know. And once this threshold passes, you will walk into spaces previously inaccessible, carrying influence, alignment, An authority that cannot be challenged by envy, fear, or insecurity. This is the true gift of the test. It prepares you for expansion without contamination. It confirms your readiness. It teaches restraint while validating intuition. You feel it, the shift in the air, the subtle tension that wasn't there before. They realize something now. Not with words, not with confrontation, but deep inside, where they feel their grip slipping.